On the morning of April 26th, 1989, a delivery driver pulled up to Carol Burnett's house in Beverly Hills. In the van was a fresh bouquet of birthday flowers. Same delivery, same date, every year for almost 3 decades, from the same woman. But by the time those flowers reached Carol's vase, the woman who sent them was already gone. Across town at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, doctors had just spent 47 minutes trying to restart her heart and failed. The flowers had outlived their sender by a matter of hours. This is the heartbreaking story of Lucille Ball's final years. To understand how a woman who once owned Hollywood ended up dying with almost nobody at her bedside, you have to rewind to one specific year. The year 1986 broke Lucille Ball in 3 separate ways, and she never put herself back together. She started that year on top of the world, with 5 Emmy Awards on her shelf, 44 million viewers at her peak, and the title of the first woman ever to run a major Hollywood studio. But by December of that same year, she would lose her career, her ex-husband, and her will to keep going, all inside 90 brutal days. It started in September. Producer Aaron Spelling had been chasing her for 7 years, pointing at The Cosby Show and The Golden Girls as proof America was hungry for the biggest comeback story in television history. She finally said yes. A BC handed her complete creative control, with no pilot, no focus groups, and no testing. The new show would be called Life with Lucy. Opening night arrived, and the studio audience clapped for almost 5 straight minutes the second she walked onto the stage. 75 years old, and the love in that room sounded just like 1953 all over again. But that ovation would be the last warm sound she would ever hear from a live studio audience. The reviews came in the next morning, and they were merciless. Critics ripped her apart, not for the writing or the cast, but for coming back at all. Magazines called her too old, newspapers called her finished, and one reviewer told her in plain English that she should have stayed retired. The ratings began to drop like a stone, and by week 6, ABC had already made the call internally that the show was dead. Lucy still had no idea. On November 17, 1986, the cast filmed the final episode. A BC told Aaron Spelling it was over that same morning, hours before Lucy was supposed to walk on set. Spelling pulled Gary Morton aside, and Gary, her husband and producer, made the decision right there in the corridor. He wouldn't break the news to her until the cameras stopped rolling. So Lucille Ball walked onto that soundstage one last time, completely unaware. She delivered her lines, nailed her physical comedy, hugged Gail Gordon, her co-star of 40 years, and thanked the crew. And then Gary told her. Right there in the dressing room, makeup still on. The woman who had built Hollywood found out she had been quietly fired hours earlier. She crumbled in private. A few days later on The Late Show with Joan Rivers, the words came out in a broken stream. "I cried, my God, I cried," she told Joan. "I had no idea I could be that frightened and hurt." Critics had broken her after 35 years on television, and now America was telling her in plain language that her time had run out. Only 8 of the 13 episodes ever aired, while the other 5 sat on a shelf for decades, and TV Guide later ranked Life with Lucy as the 26th worst show in television history. For the first time in her career, Lucy believed the critics. However, the worst part of 1986 had not even started yet. 2 weeks after the cancellation, on November 30th, Lucy picked up the phone in her Beverly Hills mansion at 1000 North Roxbury Drive and dialed Del Mar, California. November 30th was no ordinary day on her calendar. It was her wedding anniversary with Desi Arnaz, since they had married on that exact day in 1940, 46 years earlier on the dot. And on this anniversary, Desi was dying of late-stage lung cancer. He had not eaten in 3 full days, and he could barely speak. Their daughter Lucy held the phone up to his ear so he could listen. Lucy said almost nothing. She just kept repeating 3 words, the way you say something when you know it's the very last time. I love you. I love you. Daisy, I love you. Over and over, from his deathbed, Desi managed one final sentence back. I love you too, honey. Good luck with your show. He had no idea the show was already gone, and he died believing she still had something to live for. 2 days later, on December 2nd, 1986, Desi Arnaz passed away in his daughter's arms at 69 years old. The funeral was held at St. James Catholic Church in Solana Beach. Lucy sat in the front row gripping Gary Morton's hand, weeping silently the entire service. Friends close to her later said something. Inside her went quiet that day and never started up again. 5 days after Desi died, the Kennedy Center was set to honor Lucy in Washington, D.C. Desi had been planning to walk on stage and present her himself, and he had even written out a personal speech to deliver from the podium. However, Desi was gone now, his ashes scattered into the Sea of Cortez, and his speech sat on a piece of paper with no voice left to read it. Robert Stack, an old Desilu actor and family friend, stepped up to the podium. He pulled out Desi's letter and read it aloud, while Lucy sat in the audience trying not to crumble. Desi had given her 90% of the credit for everything they had built together, but the speech ended with a single line that hit her like a hammer. P.S. I Love Lucy was never just a title. She broke down crying in front of the President of the United States. After that night, something inside her shifted permanently. She stopped accepting invitations, stopped going out to dinner with the old crowd, and stopped showing up at industry parties. The famous backgammon games she used to host at her Beverly Hills home grew smaller until they almost stopped happening. The same woman who had once handed out Halloween candy on Roxbury Drive every October, dressed as a witch with blacked-out teeth, had now pulled the curtain shut on her own life. Her closest friend, in those final years, was a younger writer named Lee Tannen, who had become like family. Tannen later said the same thing in every interview he ever gave. She disintegrated so quickly. He believed her tombstone should have read from Desi's death on December 2, 1986, to her own death on April 26, 1989, because that was the life of her death. Lucy simply stopped trying. She still saw Lucy and Gary, but the wider world that had once orbited around her had quietly faded away. Vivian Vance, her best friend and TV sidekick, had passed of breast cancer back in 1979, and Lucy never quite recovered from that loss either. Some of her younger friends got busy, and the ones she had counted on most simply assumed she wanted to be left alone. The phone stopped ringing. The mansion that had once buzzed with poker nights and champagne dinners went silent for weeks at a stretch. And then there was Carol Burnett, who had been Lucy's closest friend in the industry for almost 30 years. Lucy sent Carol flowers every single year on her birthday, April 26th, without fail. Even in the worst months of her decline, even when she wouldn't see anyone else, even when she stopped picking up her own phone, the flowers always arrived on time. Remember that exact date, because it will matter more than you think. By March of 1989, Lucy was 77 years old. Her hair had gone white years before, since she had stopped dyeing it red. She walked slowly and got tired faster than she used to. but she had agreed to one last public appearance after Bob Hope spent weeks begging her to present an award with him at the 61st Academy Awards on March 29th, 1989. She hated the idea, hated the wig she had to wear, and complained that the netting gave her a headache. Her exact words backstage were, "Goddamn Hope, nobody cares what the hell he looks, but everybody cares what I look. God, I'm so tired of myself." She went anyway. When she walked out on that Oscar stage with Bob Hope, the entire room rose to its feet in a thunderous standing ovation. Hollywood's biggest stars stood up for the woman who had built modern television. She smiled, delivered her lines, walked off stage, and went home to her quiet Beverly Hills mansion. That ovation would be the last applause she ever heard. 19 days later, on the morning of April 17th, 1989, Lucy started feeling shooting pains in her chest. Gary called her doctor, but she refused to go to the hospital and insisted she felt fine. So Gary called Lucy, who finally convinced her, but Lucy insisted on putting on her makeup first and getting properly dressed. Even dying, she refused to be seen looking like a sick old woman. At Cedars-Sinai, doctors found a dissecting aortic aneurysm and rushed her into emergency surgery. The operation lasted 6.5 hours, with surgeons replacing her aortic valve and repairing her aorta. The operation was technically a success, and within a few days she was cleared to go home. But the moment that broke her completely came right after. Doctors told her she couldn't climb stairs, so she would have to live in the downstairs guest room until she healed. A makeshift bedroom for a woman who had once ruled a Hollywood empire from her own bed for 40 straight years. She told Gary she felt like a stranger in her own house. The hospital bed they wheeled in took up half the room, and the phone on the nightstand sat silent for hours at a stretch. A few cards arrived from old colleagues and a few flowers from fans, but the people who had once filled her dining room every weekend sent get-well notes instead of showing up in person. Friends who saw her in those last days said she looked defeated, and the light in her eyes had finally gone out on the morning of April 26th, 1989, 8 days after she came home. Lucy woke at 1000 North Roxbury Drive with severe back pain and lost consciousness within minutes. Her surgically repaired aorta had ruptured a second time in a completely different spot from the first surgery, and she went into full cardiac arrest. Paramedics rushed her back to Cedars-Sinai, where doctors worked on her for 47 minutes, pumped her chest, and shocked her heart, but none of it worked. Lucille Ball was pronounced dead at 5 in the morning, at 77 years old. And then the flowers arrived. Carol Burnett's birthday flowers, ordered the day before and packaged ready for delivery, arrived at Carol's house that very same morning. April 26th was both Carol's birthday and Lucy's death day, the exact same date on the calendar. The bouquet sat in Carol's vase while across town, paramedics were declaring its sender legally dead. Desi Arnaz later said the hardest part was that she couldn't grieve alone, since the whole world wanted to grieve with her, and she felt as if she never truly went to her own mother's funeral the way a daughter should. Lucy was cremated, her ashes placed at Forest Lawn in the Hollywood Hills. 3 months later, President George H.W. Bush awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, but she hadn't lived to see it. Lee Tannen put it plainest of all that on her death certificate it reads, "Ruptured aorta," but he always believed Lucy died because she had no desire to live any more. 44 million viewers a night, 5 Emmys, the first woman ever to run a major Hollywood studio, and in the end, a quiet bedroom downstairs, a phone that almost never rang, and a heart that simply stopped fighting. Lucille Ball spent her whole life making the world laugh, and the terrible irony is that the same world she made laugh forgot to keep showing up for her at the end. Sometimes the brightest stars burn out in the darkest, quietest rooms. So, if there's someone in your life who used to light up every room they walked into, call them today, while they can still pick up the phone.